record button.
Okay, there you go. So we are recording, and this, by staying on the call, you're consenting to being in the recording. Today's session, which is part of the 5th Annual Doctoral Career Pathways Conference, is about research skills. Today, we have 3 fantastic panelists who are going to share their career stories and help you get a better idea of how your research skills that you've developed through your doctoral training translate onto different types of careers in different types of employers. So let me just tell you who's going to be here today and a little bit about how we're going to run today's panel. So we have 3 panelists. Each one is going to take a moment. They're going to actually take 7 or 8 minutes, and they're going to tell you about their career story. And once they finish that, we're going to open this up to a Q&A. And I would encourage all of you to type questions in the chat box as each of the presenters is talking, in case you don't want to forget or if you don't want to ask the question. But I really encourage each of you to turn your camera on, introduce yourself, and then direct your question to one or more of the panelists once we get to the Q&A section. And what we've agreed is Dr. Nina Daoud is going to go first. She did share that she's feeling a little under the weather, so she may decide to leave the panel a little bit early. But after she shares her story, we're going to hear from Dr. Kristen Klein and then Dr. Naheed Ahmed. So without any further ado, I want to go ahead and turn this over to Nina so she can share a little bit about what she does and how she got there and anything else she wants to share.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. Like she mentioned, I am still a little bit under the weather, so I apologize you can't see my face, but I'll go ahead and get started. So I started my post-PhD career working as an analyst for the U.S. Government Accountability Office. And going back a little bit, my degree was in higher education, student affairs, and international education policy. And I use a lot of like sociological theories and frameworks to frame my dissertation. And I was primarily a qualitative researcher. So I really focused my graduate studies on perfecting or getting close to perfect in qualitative research. I was very focused. And then, but throughout my graduate career, it's a very practice-based program. So it's education. A lot of folks go to academia, but a lot of people end up staying in DC, working in policy and think tanks. So pretty much every year I had an internship of some sort. And in my final year, I got an internship at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, which is a nonpartisan legislative branch agency that works on behalf of the U.S. Congress. So essentially, we operate as the research arm of the U.S. Congress. And so when constituents or members of Congress think that there's an issue that needs to be examined a little bit more deeply, they essentially hire us or like contract us to look into it. And so we kind of operate as a consulting agency, and our only client is the U.S. Congress. And so this was my 5th internship in graduate school during my last semester, and having done many other internships, it was just like to supplement my income. It was not meant to be like a career choice or anything like that. But I knew that towards the end of my graduate career, the number one thing that was important to me was stability. And I actually added an extra year to my graduate studies because I received a fellowship from the Ford Foundation. And so I had received a postdoc offer at Columbia University, and I received a dissertation fellowship from the Ford Foundation. And because I wanted to keep my options open, the postdoc would have been great, but I thought like, I don't want to move somewhere for a year or two and then have to figure out what to do after that. And DC is really expensive, but New York is even more expensive. So I just really did not want to move to New York City without like a permanent job. So turned that down, accepted the fellowship. And then during that final year of graduate school is when I entered for the GAO. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some links in the chat box afterwards so that you all can look to see what these job descriptions actually entail. But essentially, as an intern, you're working, it's equivalent to maybe being like a graduate student research assistant. So the projects are very much similar to a dissertation, except for there are 2 or 3 people assigned to it. So it is a little bit easier than graduate school in that regard. And there's a lot more guidance at GAO. So really there's like data collection, which because I was a qualitative researcher, I tended to pick projects where I would be doing interviews or content analysis or literature reviews and things like that. And so it was really a great way for me to use my qualitative research skills. The one thing about the GAO is that you don't get to necessarily pick what areas. So I didn't really want to stay in higher ed, but you get to move around through different topic areas. So I did work in housing policy and retirement security and Medicare, Medicaid things. So really for folks who are interested and curious about a lot of different topics, it's really, really a great fit. And my qualitative research skills, I think, really made me stand out because it's not a job that requires a PhD. They usually recruit from MPP programs. So at Maryland, there's a pretty robust MPP program. Most of the Maryland folks at GAO were actually MPP alumni, not PhD. So in that regard, having the methodological skills we develop in our doctoral programs, I think really made me stand out. And so in thinking about like kind of next steps in my career, like some of the things I wish I would have been a little bit more intentional about, which obviously you all are already, because you're here, you're listening to panelists talk about non-academic careers, is just like looking out for internship opportunities. It's a lot easier, what I've learned, a lot easier to break into some of these fields through an internship than it is through just blindly applying to a full-time position, especially because you're going to be up against people who've interned in these areas and also people who have had more robust experiences. But like as an intern, you don't really need any other experience. So that is like one thing that I would say like is really, really important. In addition, I did see on the schedule that you all had some training or like a lunch and learn about LinkedIn. So you didn't attend that or folks haven't mentioned it, LinkedIn is really, really important. I never used my LinkedIn in graduate school. I've had LinkedIn since 2008 and only now in 2021 to 2022 is like when I actually started using it, and it's really opened up a lot of opportunities for me. And I know in academic spaces, we usually rely on conferences, in-person conferences, panels, and things like that. And LinkedIn is really a gem because you don't really have to be in person. You can just message people and reach out and connect and build your network that way. And I found that folks on LinkedIn are a lot more approachable than folks at academic conferences are. And so that's one thing I would suggest for folks in like just like making sure you have some sort of online presence to connect with different people. And then I think one of the other things that I learned in the last couple of months, especially, so I've left the GAO and I'm transitioning into user experience research role, qualitative role at Meta, which is now, it used to be called Facebook. And so breaking into the tech industry, I think we develop so many research skills in our doctoral programs that unless you know of somebody who's also been in these different spaces, it's really hard to navigate those things. And I think LinkedIn is really, really a gem in that regard. And what I realized in my networking experience over the past year, pretty much 4 years out of the PhD, people are a lot more willing to help out grad students than they are like full professionals. So I had a little bit of challenges. It ended up landing a job and it ended up working out okay. But I do remember thinking back to being like a PhD candidate and saying like, hey, I'm like interested in picking your brain about X, Y, Z. And people were just like really, really open to that. And I think it's just a little bit harder to do like post PhD, post dissertation, where you should be kind of having it all together. So again, because you all are here, I think you're already on the right track in doing that. And so so I think that's pretty much it on my end. I can just go ahead and search send in some of the links in the chat box, and then I'm happy to take some questions during Q&A after the other panelists share their stories.
Thank you so much, Nina. It's so great to hear someone who's 4 years out saying, hey, it's a lot easier to network when you're a current student. I so appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Okay, so Kristen, you're up.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you, and thanks for coming out today. Yeah, so I currently work at the MITRE Corporation. So I've been out of grad school. Let's see, I defended in September 2013. So yeah, I've been out for almost 10 years now. So yeah, it's good to look back and be able to say you've been out for 10 years. So yeah, and you're all here, of course, because you're interested in potentially some careers outside academia and looking at different options. So I've worked at 3 different companies since I finished up school. And you'll find, I think that, in some cases, that's a good way to sort of feel things out, get a sense of what you like about certain jobs, what you don't like about other certain jobs or organizations. And my current position I've been in for about 5.5 years now. So I really like it. But yeah, it may take a couple of tries getting your feet wet at different places, and in the DC area, one of the things that can happen too, which you'll learn and no one tells you when you're in grad school, is that contract work can dry up. So if you're a contractor, then that can be a source of some job instability too, especially when you first get on the market, but you'll land on your feet. But yeah, I've been at the MITRE Corporation for about 5 years now. What they do is they operate what are called FFRDCs, federally funded research and development centers. There are a lot of companies, a lot of corporations out there that operate these FFRDCs for different federal agencies. And our role is sort of like a special purpose contractor to various federal agencies. The intent is that, we're in partnership with them for a long time. We know a lot of like the history, a lot of the backstory, a lot of the leadership and strategy. And we can sort of help advise them on critical and generally pretty high profile issues. So right now, most of my work is with veterans, which is very rewarding. So working with Veterans Affairs to help them improve their transition assistance program for transitioning service members who are moving into civilian life, helping design like behavioral nudges to try to encourage folks who are transitioning into civilian life to take advantage of all the benefits that the VA offers. So some really cool work like that. It's fun and it's very rewarding. Yeah, so in terms of, sort of how I landed in these roles and some job search strategies, I think LinkedIn, I totally agree with Nina. That's a great way to network and kind of, get a real feel for what it's like to be out there, just watching people who post from companies that you're interested in and kind of tracking, or agencies you're interested in and tracking. One of the big job aggregator sites that was super helpful for me when I was looking for work was Indeed.com. It just kind of pulls everything in together from a variety of different places. And it was just my one-stop shop for job searches in general. Sometimes the federal jobs get pulled into that too. Some of the keywords I searched, I didn't search as much for job titles because I've learned over the years that job titles vary a lot, and what's a senior or a principal or a lead or, at one organization is totally different from what it is at a different organization. So you might start with like, what are your credentials? Because often that's going to determine like what your base pay might be when you're looking for a job. Is it sort of a master's level pay in education? Is it a PhD level? What are you looking for? And then just specific skills you're interested in. So like if you want a job that's going to let you do statistical analysis, looking for search terms like SPSS, Stata, SAS, R, Tableau, like specific skills that you want to be using on the job. UX, if you're really interested in, user experience research, looking for those kinds of things. So more than job titles, I would say kind of like focus on the skills you're interested in using every day. Because that's a good way to also filter out some of the jobs that may think they need someone with your skill set, but they're not quite sure. And you might be the only person in the organization that has it, and no one knows how to write that job description very well. That can happen sometimes. So look for the skills and the search terms where you're like, I recognize that. That's me. And they know who I am and what I can do. Yeah, let's see. And yeah, I think just important skills that you learn in grad school, really critical thinking. I totally agree with Nina as well, like the research skills you learn, quant and qual, any sort of research and analysis chops that you bring to the table are going to be invaluable. And in addition to that, just the critical thinking that, you kind of get put through the ringer and trained in how to think, how to assess a problem and, devise a study to try to address it and interpret the results in a meaningful way. So those are skills that apply, and you'll continue to refine and grow them on the job, especially, when you get out into, the real world and you're dealing with policymakers and people who have to make decisions about money and, funding and budgets and stuff. And there are real world implications of the research that you're doing that are sometimes quite impactful. You kind of learn how to work with a variety of stakeholders and, make recommendations. That's something you don't often get to do when you're in grad school, is make, really meaningful recommendations that could cost people a whole lot of money to implement. And you kind of have to figure out, is the juice worth the squeeze, and, work with people who have been around a long time to help you assess that. So it's great. Like, you bring those foundational skills and you just keep learning and growing in different ways than you did in grad school. So it's nice. It's fun. It's good to be a researcher out in the real world. It's fun. And yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else that I didn't cover? I'm happy to answer questions, but yeah.
I think that's a great place to start. It's so wonderful to hear you talk about how you're bringing in some basic skills, the things that you were trained on, and then you keep on growing. Because I know so often as I'm meeting with students, they'll read a job posting and they're like, I don't have all those things, but it just sounds like you're really reassuring people.
Yeah, you'll be okay.
Great. Okay, well, let's hear from our last panelist. And these panelists always fit together beautifully. So I know whatever story Naheed is going to tell us is going to work wonderfully.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to present, and thank you for attending today's panel. So to start off with, I didn't have a really linear trajectory in terms of my research path. So I'm going to go back to my experience as a master's student and what I did after that and how that informed my experience as a doctoral student. So after I got my master's degree, my training was primarily in qualitative research, and the industry I worked in and continue to work in is public health. And I started working for a university on global health projects, which was a great learning experience just in terms of learning those quote unquote soft and quote unquote hard skills, like the hard skills in terms of learning different theories, methods, approaches to research, but then the soft skills in terms of working as part of multidisciplinary and multicultural teams, working on different health topics, just in terms of being able to show future employers that I had that skill set of working with people from different disciplines, backgrounds, working abroad in the US, and then also just, sometimes managing projects as well. So that was really helpful in terms of gaining those skills, and also helped me hone in on what I was interested in focusing on in my doctoral program and the skills that I wanted to continue building. As Kristen and Nina said, it's a lifelong process in terms of you gain those foundational skills and then you continue to build upon them. And so through that work experience, I quickly realized that quantitative research skills are really important as well. And depending on the environment you're working in, you might find, or the projects as well, you might find that it might require a mixed methods approach, it might require qualitative skills, it might require quantitative skills. So if you can say you have both, that puts you at a strategic advantage in terms of being able to work on different types of projects. So my doctoral program, as painful as it was at times, I did continue with my statistics courses, take those advanced stats courses, and I made sure that my dissertation project incorporated qualitative and quantitative aspects as well. And so when I got to the final year of my doctoral program, I'll have to admit, I've sort of blocked out some of the memories from that time period because I was working on my dissertation and also simultaneously on the job market, which is quite a bit of work. And so this was in 2019, which, as you all know, was right before the pandemic struck. And so I was working on my dissertation and at the same time trying to network. And my doctoral advisor was really great in terms of her support, but then also facilitating connections to other researchers. I had very specific research interests in terms of, looking at South Asian Americans and Muslim Americans. And there were, as you can imagine, given those specific topics, there are only a few number of researchers who also work on that topic or with these populations as well. And I, as a student, could have reached out to the professors on my own. And I mean, as Nina and others have said, professors are usually pretty accommodating and responsive to students reaching out to them. And I will say, if your doctoral advisor reaches out to them on your behalf, they might be more likely to respond. I'm not saying that they wouldn't respond if you reached out to them on your own, but if another professor from another university reaches out to them, they were more inclined to reach out, respond, and also even set up individual meetings with me, which was really helpful. Additionally, at the time, I'd registered to present and attend at the American Public Health Conference, which is a big public health conference. So whatever conference is sort of a big deal, or if you know people are attending it that you want to work with, I encourage you to register for it, put together an abstract, submit it, find the funding to go, because that's a great way to network in person. And that actually led to a meeting with my current supervisor. I just started a new job, which I'll get into a bit, but we met at the conference, and I'd come prepared to talk about my research interests, but in fact, it was actually a job interview, which, I mean, I think I did well, because afterwards she said, all right, let's continue keeping in touch and I'll see what I can do to bring you to NYU. Unfortunately, 2020 started, coronavirus came up. And so as a result, a lot of budgets got tightened or cut at the time. And so unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to NYU, but she said, let's keep in touch. And so when you get that sort of an invitation from someone, take advantage of it. So what I did during that time was actually, I was working on publishing my dissertation results. And so as my papers were getting accepted and published, I would send it out to her and say, hi, just want to share an update. Here's, the latest publication. So she could see that I was being productive with my time. And also these studies were related to her interest directly as well. So making the case for why I'd be a good fit for her team. And so although I wasn't able to get to NYU immediately, in the short term, I did find a job with Medstar Health Research Institute, which it's part of Medstar Health, which is the largest healthcare provider in Maryland and DC. So for those of you who are interested in non-academic jobs, consider thinking about local healthcare systems or even insurance companies. Quite a few of them have internal research departments, and they do hire people with PhDs. And you'll find yourself working in clinical settings and also working with patient records, which can be really interesting depending on your interests. So I worked at Medstar, I think, for about 1.5 years. And then I decided I was ready for a change and I wanted to continue along the previous research I'd been doing on South Asian Americans. And so I reached back out to the person at NYU, and we had a meeting, and she said, I would still love to bring you to NYU, so let's see what we can do. And so I'm happy to say that I got hired this time, the second time around. And so I'm fairly brand new in the role, but this is just my second week at NYU. I'm working remotely at the moment, but the skills I learned for my doctoral program in terms of the qualitative and quantitative skills, and then also the soft skills too, in terms of project management, working on different health topics, working with clinicians, PhD and MA level researchers has been really helpful. So definitely emphasize the training that you receive in your doctoral program, which is unique and sets you apart from other candidates. And also emphasize your other work experiences as well, because you've gained valuable experiences from that. I'm happy to take any additional questions. And then if anyone has follow-up questions afterwards, happy to communicate with you offline.
Okay, well, that is fantastic. So everyone who's attending now has a real sense of your backgrounds. And I want to encourage questions from the attendees first. If you would turn your camera on and introduce yourself and direct your questions. This is part of networking. You get to be seen. Megan.
All right.
Thanks, Megan.
Of course. Well, thank you all so much. That was all really helpful and interesting. I have a question for Naheed. So you mentioned that you worked at Medstar for a little bit, and I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about like what your experience there was like, kind of how you ended up in like healthcare research. Any tips for that?
Sure. So I heard about the position actually from the School of Public Health listserv. My boss at Medstar, she graduated from the doctoral program at UMD, and she reached out to the School of Public Health to share an announcement. I saw it, I responded immediately. So having your CV ready to go and then having sort of a draft cover letter that you can easily tailor was really helpful. And I say that because as soon as a job announcement comes out, they've already received several applications at that point. So if you can get in there within the first like 2 or 3 days, that will catch their eye and they're not wading through a list of applications. And then in terms of the work, so Medstar had just recently started a Center for Health Equity Research, which is my interest. And so I was just excited about getting involved, as they started this new center, and they had a variety of projects as well. So if you like variety, it could be a good experience. For example, I worked on projects related to improving maternal and child health outcomes. I also worked on projects with surveillance of how COVID-19 is spreading in the community, just a variety of different things. And then because Medstar is a healthcare organization, you have the opportunity to work directly with clinicians as well, if that's something you're interested in terms of projects directly related to improving patient health outcomes. Did that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Naheed, do you know if they have summer internships? Did you happen to gather that info while you worked there? Do they bring students in for internships?
They do bring students in, and I did work with students. So there were undergraduate students, master's level students, and I will have to say most of those positions seem to be filled based on networking, who you knew within the organization. And I mean, I'm sure they sometimes sort of broadly share that they have an opening, but it seemed like most of the interns were hired based on who they were connected to or who they knew.
It always comes back to networking, doesn't it? I know there are questions out there.
I'd love to ask a question to any panelists who would like to engage. My name's Christine. I am graduating this semester. So excited in the higher ed program. And I worked full time throughout my PhD. So I didn't have many research, like formal research projects that resulted in journal articles, or I wasn't able to take on internship work. And so now I have a student affairs and like higher ed admin background professionally. And I'm trying to make the switch towards education policy and trying to kind of work on a more systemic level in higher ed. And I would love any advice that maybe you would have for applying to positions and like leveraging all of the things that we've done and learned in the PhD program and coursework, but trying to kind of overcome maybe some of these prior experience requirements, or like the one that I'm currently running into right now is like they want professional work experience with a specific data software. I'm like, well, I've used it for 4 years in my dissertation work. So any and all advice you have there would be massively helpful.
Nina, since you're in the College of Ed, do you maybe want to start with that one? And Christine, Can I ask you a clarifying question? Did you say that you're seeing ads and that you've used the software in your dissertation, or that you have not? I'm sorry. You have, okay.
Yeah. So sometimes they'll ask for professional work experience using a software or a technique where I might not have done it professionally in one of my job roles, but I've either done it through coursework or through my dissertation.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I forgot to mention, but I meant to mention, is like we should not discount the amount of work that we put in through our work and coursework, capstone project, dissertation. And like both of the jobs that I've gotten post PhD, so my job at GAO and then now my job at Meta Facebook, when they say 6 years of experience, they're accounting for, like if your PhD took 4 years, that means that 4 years of experience, it's like 6 years post bachelor's or 6 years post master's experience. And I think one of the things that was helpful for me when I started meeting with people informally on LinkedIn, stuff like that, is reframing my career experiences as like, let's say I've worked 4 years post PhD, but really what I should have been saying is I have 10 years of experience. And so talking to people helped me think that. And now if you look at my LinkedIn, it'll say like I have 10 years of experience because I've included the PhD, but people had to kind of tell me that. And I think talking about the dissertation as a like how I would frame it as like an end-to-end research project. You manage it from start to finish. You manage all the stakeholders, which is like your dissertation committee members and your participants if you did qualitative research. So like reframing the work you've done in graduate school to map onto what the job wants is like a helpful exercise. I think it's easier said than done. It is a muscle that needs to be exercised. And I'm happy, like, if you want to connect offline, to just chat with you about your dissertation research and like talk through like what that might look like in the real world, quote unquote real world. Yeah, exactly what Kristen said in the chat. So I have felt that experience with you. And I think when I finished my graduate degree, I would have probably said I had 0 years of experience in qualitative research, but that's a lie because I've had 5 years of experience. And so I think just reframing it, and I think being in the academic system makes us feel like we're not really experienced, and you'd be surprised that like once you get out into the real world, how much of what we learn in graduate school is like hard skills that like are very, very valuable to work for. So I think in your case, the challenge might be just reframing, and I'm like happy to do that with you offline.
I'm looking to see if Kristen or Naheed, I saw Kristen, you put something in the chat box, but do either of you want to add anything to that?
I think what Nina said is spot on. Yep. Give yourself full credit. Yep.
Excellent. That was a super question. Okay. There must be more questions.
I had a question. I hope if that's okay. Oh, did somebody else say something? Oh, Ashley, go ahead.
Oh, sure. I didn't want to cut you off there. I had a quick question to anyone. Sorry, I can't turn my camera on. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, but I had a question for each of you, I believe. And you mentioned that you are working remotely now, but if any of the panelists can speak to your experiences like working remotely, and if it's something that you have both experience working remotely as well as in person, what are some of the kind of positives and negatives of those experiences, and some of the things that you've had to kind of get used to? I think that something for me that I've noticed is that with, the PhD process, a lot of it does involve kind of like either offsite work, if you're not doing, especially in the era of COVID, if you're not doing in-person interviews or X, Y, and Z. So I'm wondering how that job transition has been in terms of finding remote work as well as in person, if there's any kind of distinguishments or preferences for you all.
I can start. So my job with Medstar actually started out remotely from the beginning, which was a new experience for me. I never worked remotely 100%. I think I only went into the office twice to pick up my computer equipment. And I don't think it was until several months into the pandemic that I scheduled some coffee meetups with some of my colleagues just to have that face-to-face interaction. And so I think similar to what many of you have experienced is with remote work or remote education, you might find yourself in virtual meetings all day long, which can be exhausting at times. And also with not being in that work or office-based environment, you miss out on those personal connections and interactions with people. And also, just popping into someone's office to say hi or just have a quick chat with them. And there are many different software programs to keep people connected, like Zoom, WebEx, et cetera. And then if you use Microsoft Teams, there's a chat feature, which I definitely have used with a lot of my colleagues. And so now at NYU, it's very similar in that we're using virtual meetings, but then they do also try to have in-person gatherings as well. And I think that's increased now that the vaccine has been approved and many people have gotten vaccinated, but it's definitely a different work experience, unlike any others. I mean, in some ways it's kind of nice. You don't have to deal with the commute to work. And then in terms of getting dressed, you only have to worry about waist up. So you can be comfortable at home in your pajamas and maybe a blouse. So those are my thoughts. I mean, I feel like, just given the pandemic, this is the new reality that we're all adjusting to. And I know some companies are asking their employees to come back into the workplace, but it's kind of been voluntary and sometimes it's been mandatory, but we still have ongoing concerns about COVID. And I will say, working in the health field, that's something that we're always mindful of as well. So even if we are allowed to come into the office, we have to wear a mask or we have to get a test beforehand. But I'll let Kristen and Nina talk about their experiences.
Yeah, I can jump in. So when I was working at GAO, it's been pretty much a trailblazer in the remote work environment. I think for people starting their careers, a lot of it's personal. Like when I was a graduate student, I never did work at home. When I was an undergraduate student, I never did work at home. I like that separation. And so the transition to full remote work was very, very challenging for me, actually. And when I started the job search again, all these companies were like bragging about how great it is to do remote work. And I was just like, that's not what I want. I want in person for the reasons that Naheed mentioned. And so, but I do think that for folks who have a strong preference one way or the other, you can find that. I think that's the beauty of like this world that we're living in, and technology allows you to do that. My personal preference is to have a hybrid work environment, because like Naheed mentioned, I have a day full of meetings. I don't want to do that at home and on Zoom. It's just really, really draining and exhausting for me. But if I have a lighter day where I'm doing independent work and it's quiet, then I think some of that stuff I could do at home. And so I think there are pros and cons to both. I think relationship building is often a lot easier to do in person, but the flexibility and privacy and comfort that comes from working at home can't really be beat. So I think for me coming into the workforce, I had a really, really good understanding of like what my preferences are, because like a lot of these preferences, we developed them throughout our entire educational careers, you know? And so like when COVID happened, and I had a hard time, like friends from college were hitting me up because they always knew that Nina never worked at home. And so I think it's just like the same preferences you have when you're working on your dissertation or coursework and things like that, you could take those into the real world now. And so I think the most important thing is like wherever you're most productive, most efficient at the work and building relationships, you can kind of navigate looking for jobs that have those options.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think, yeah, it really comes down a lot to personal preference and kind of what your own life circumstances and needs are too. We see, like, I know at MITRE, we have a range of different generations and stuff in the workforce, and, you know, folks have different needs at different points in their lives and careers. So like where I'm at now, about 10 years out of school, there are a lot of people with kids, having kids, you know, with newborns who don't want to go into the office and potentially risk anything, you know, aging parents, ailing parents, that kind of thing. You know, they may also be at a point in their careers and lives where they don't, you know, financially need to have a roommate anymore. So, you know, they may have a little more space at home and a little more personal space, as opposed to, you know, two people kind of trying to talk over each other in meetings all day and stuff. So it's just, you know, it kind of, again, as Nina said, and Naheed, it kind of depends on your personal preference and how you work best. Yeah.
And the thing that I want to add is in the Career Center, we're really observing employers liking a mix of things as well. For them being able to do the entire recruitment process, to do screening interviews, half-day interviews, onboarding, to do all of that remotely is very efficient for them, right? They don't have to leave their office and drive somewhere else. And for all the reasons that have been mentioned by the panelists, they're offering a variety of work scenarios, and they're telling potential recruits right up front. They're naming it because they know that they need to compete with other employers. So if you're really interested in remote, they want to tell you that that's an option. And then there are some other workspaces and even hiring managers who maybe are still thinking in the old ways. And so as a job seeker, it's really important to get clarification on what that menu of opportunities is. Yeah. Great question, Ashley. Blessing, did you have a question?
I did. So were there particular experiences that you had outside of the classroom that helped build your skills, or maybe helped you clarify how you were going to approach your job search?
I could start. So I would say that it helped me build some, and Naheed made the distinction between like the technical skills and then the soft skills. I would say like all of my internship experiences, my conferencing, presenting at conferences, connecting with people, that helped me tremendously as far as the soft skills, which I think we don't we don't learn about those in the classroom necessarily. You know, like you might have those experiences if you do in-person data collection for your dissertation, or have to manage stakeholders and things like that during your own independent research. But I don't really think a lot of it comes from the classroom experience. And so I think all of the non-academic experiences that I did throughout my doctoral program really helped me a lot in the real world, because what folks were looking for is a willingness to learn rather than a mastery of technical skills. And then on top of that, like actually having soft skills, which I think that's something that I think was really important for me to develop throughout graduate school. So like being amenable, open-minded, negotiating, being persuasive, things like that, and critical thinking skills. I think those have been really, really incredibly helpful in my job search, and less so about the specific methods. Like, I don't say nobody cares about it, but it's just really like, that was not rocket science. Once I got into the real world, it was really, really the soft skills and interpersonal communication. A lot of companies use the term cross-functional communication. I think ability to work well with others is essentially one of the most important things in the real world. So I think that those are the skills that I think I learned.
Kristen, do you want to say a bit about how you built some of those skills? I know I've heard project management being named and stakeholders, and I often hear from current doc students and postdocs that the nature of their work, the nature of their research assistantship, or the culture in their department is one of independent work. So how did you build it, and or how do others around you, how did they build those skills?
Yeah, I think for the job search specifically, I think the two things that I recall even 10 years later are our colleagues, and by that I mean like fellow grad students who had gone out on the job market and not gone academic, and just talking to them about their search strategies. We exchanged resumes so that we could see what each other was sort of listing and doing, and provided feedback on each other's stuff. It was incredibly helpful. And then some of the professional conferences in my field, and probably in your fields as well, have, especially if they're more student focused rather than sort of professional focused conferences, they'll sometimes have panels or pre-conference talks or what have you on non-academic career tracks where you can network and meet people who are, it's something like this where, they're happy to talk to you about and help out. So yeah, that's what stands out to me. And I think, the project management experience, some of it comes from, you think about what it takes to manage a graduate research project. If you have research assistants that, like undergrad research assistants, if you've been a teaching assistant and had to manage, it's all about managing your time, being able to plan out a dissertation project or any other projects that you might be working, side projects that you're working on that eat up a lot of time. So, just think about all the things that you have to do, and kind of, you can view it and use it as an opportunity for practice. It's relatively safe, relatively risk-free, low risk at least, practice where there aren't going to be huge implications if something blows up, or like it's academic research. You're going to be okay. So get some good practice there. And then a lot of it is just on the job. Every company has their own systems and quirks and financial system issues and all that stuff. Like, it's all very tailored and unique in a lot of cases. So you kind of learn it once you get on the job at a particular company in terms of their own stuff. But some of those broad skills just apply: managing people, interacting with people, being able to manage up. Like, think about tough conversations with your dissertation committee or advisor, and being able to manage up effectively is very important, especially early career.
Were any of you involved in student organizations or other volunteer types of things while you were a student that you leveraged when you were interviewing to demonstrate those soft skills that Nina mentioned?
Sure, I can talk about one group I was involved in. It's called Public Health Without Borders. I think they may have changed their name, but it's in the School of Public Health. And so undergraduate students design and implement sort of health information projects that they then implement abroad. So I think at the time they had projects in India, Sierra Leone, and Peru. And then the grad students were part of the club in terms of mentoring the undergraduate students. So that actually goes to project management skills, because you're managing a group of undergrad students as they're, researching a topic and then developing some sort of health education intervention. And then some of us actually went abroad with the students. And so we sort of provided oversight, management, guidance, et cetera. And then when we came back from these trips, we helped develop the findings into a poster presentation or a publication if possible. So use those experiences during your interviews and your cover letters, just in terms of about managing students at all different levels, and then also working on different health topics, and then showing the deliverables that came out of that project, right? If you can show that not only can you execute a project, but then that there are specific outputs, whether it be a conference presentation, a publication, that's going to look great to future employers in terms of showing that you can go from point A to point B and get things done on time and, in an organized manner. And so that was really useful, especially I didn't have much teaching experience when I went on the job market. So being able to show I had that mentorship experience was really helpful. And then I also want to note that some job applications, they will ask you specifically if you have mentoring experiences, especially of people from underrepresented groups in the sciences. And so I've actually, for one application, I actually added a new section to my CV on that specifically. And it just wasn't just, I listed the names of the mentees, but then also the specific projects and the specific outputs as well. And I've actually left that in my CV because, it's important to me personally and professionally to do that in terms of mentoring others, but then also some employers are looking for that as well. So that experience was really just helpful in terms of broadening my mentorship experience and gaining those skills in terms of mentoring students of different skill levels.
I'm looking around to see if there are other questions.
I have another question if no one wants to ask that hasn't gone yet. So coming from an academic background, I'm wondering if there was anything that was surprising or caught you off guard about the non-academic interview process, and if there's any associated advice you have with that.
I could start. I think the hardest part for me, the most challenging part of my post-academic experience is the fact that in academia, a lot of times you're evaluated based on the quality of the work that you're doing. And for instance, at GAO, but mostly other companies, I think Naheed and Kristen probably could explain this as well in their jobs too. You evaluate a number of different things. You're evaluated your ability to manage your workload, your ability to do quality work, which is what we do in academia, and then also your ability to work well with others. And I think the managed workload and working well with others, those particular competencies, I think nobody really cares about those in academia. And I think in the real world, they're very, very important. And essentially, I always joked with my PhD colleagues who are at GAO with me. It's like, basically they're evaluating us on likability, like your ability to work well with others. And I think that's a soft skill that we don't talk a lot about. And in the interview process, they'll ask you, tell us about a time where X, Y, Z behavioral interviews, and then you can look up STAR interview methods where you have to talk about your situation, the task, action and result. I think that was really, really foreign for me. That's not how any of my academic job interviews went. It was essentially tell us how smart you are and what great ideas you have, and I think the real world is very, very different in that regard. And so being able to talk about things you've done, how you handle specific difficult situations with people, but also with the work, I think being prepared to discuss things in a wide breadth of ways is really, really important throughout the interview process.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think communication is really key, that, they can see a lot on paper and from talking to your references and looking at your, your transcripts or what have you, or your dissertation, but what they can gauge from the in-person piece is the communication. How do you communicate your work? How do you communicate with other people? How do you communicate about and view yourself and your role? Have you done your homework on the company? A lot of times they really want to see that something about their organization. and, you've done your homework going in and you're not just kind of taking the shotgun approach to job application stuff. You're kind of really interested in them and tailoring things to try to, get in good with them and interested in the kind of work that they do. And yeah, it's kind of about selling yourself, not so much about your particular program of research, like it might be in academia. It's more like, how do you fit with them? Why would you be a good hire for them? And you get to interview them about that too. You get to ask questions. So yeah.
Naheed, I know you're sort of in an in-between space, right? In a medical school now, so you're still in academia, but have you noticed some differences in the way that you were, quote, interviewed for that position versus your Medstar position?
So it's interesting, as I was listening to Nina and Kristen talk about their experiences, the Medstar experience was actually very much like a faculty interview, in that I had to give a formal presentation to the whole team. And then afterwards, I had individual interviews with other members of the team. So it was very traditional in terms of how academia usually conducts interviews. I will say that when they were doing a reference check on me, they were asking my references about how I got along with each other people and personality and fit, et cetera, because I think they were very intentional about not only having, someone having the technical skills, but then also the interpersonal skills and, getting along with people from different backgrounds. And then in terms of my current job, I didn't give a formal research presentation, but I did have to talk about it. And then also, as Kristen said, make sure you research the work that they're doing, because that's going to shape the questions that they ask you to see if you're going to fit in well with their team and if you have the capacity and background to get involved with their current projects. And they'll appreciate that too, if you can demonstrate that during an interview, that you made the effort of going to their website, reading up about their projects, et cetera. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, Susan, but it's varied quite a bit.
Well, it's hard to believe that our hour is almost up. We have about 3 minutes left. And if I could ask each of the panelists to just share one piece of advice in less than a minute, maybe something you wish that you had known or that you'd like to leave our attendees with, just a good piece of advice. Naheed, why don't you start? And then Kristen, and then Nina.
Sure. So my one piece of advice would be to network and to nurture those relationships, because you don't know what opportunities it might lead to later down the line. And even if you don't end up working at the organization or for that person, it might lead to future collaborations, which you might find really useful to your career.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think one thing I would look back and say is it's okay to move around a little bit early career. I felt so much of a sense of like just shame and like, oh my God, I'm this horrible millennial person who, is job hopping early career. But, it's especially when you're early career, it's really easy to feel that way because you don't really know what you're getting into. Like you don't have a lot of information, you don't have a lot of experience yet to even judge, is this the kind of organization I want to work for? Do they know what I do? Like, is this the right job role for me? So it's okay to move around. And, a lot of people can actually do better financially over the long run moving around a little bit, especially early career, than if you just try to do the sort of, I'm going to be loyal for 50 years and get my gold watch. So, times have changed. And, you'll find a fit at some point, and you're just learning. You're just at a different point in your career. So don't be worried about that at all. And it's okay to have boundaries and know what you want and have your eye on what you want next.
I think both Naheed and Kristen had really great points, and Naheed's point is the one I was going to say. But I think going back to Kristen's point, kind of knowing what you want, I think don't be afraid to figure out the skills you really, really enjoy using, as well as the types of work you enjoy doing. Because I think often when we're finishing graduate school, we're like, oh, we're totally open, we just want a job. And I think being really, really specific and explicit about the type of work you want to do, while it may seem like you're closing off a lot of options, people will respect that when you speak to them, saying, like, I know I felt that a lot when I'm a qualitative researcher, and I felt a lot of pressure to be this mixed methods person or a quant person, but I got like a C in stats. Like there's just no way I could have like promoted myself as a mixed methods person. But I think as I navigated my career, being really, really good at qualitative research really helps to distinguish me and being specialized. So if there is a skill or a topic area that you really, really like, focus in on those and build that into all the conversations and networking conversations you're having, because ultimately something will come up that works specifically for their skills. So don't be afraid to like close off options by focusing in on the specific skills you want to do.
That is such excellent advice. Excellent, excellent. I want to thank all three panelists for giving us a glimpse into what you're currently doing day to day. And I also want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to share these experiences with current students and postdocs. For attendees, we are going to be posting this recording to YouTube, the University Career Center's YouTube channel. And you'll be getting an email tomorrow morning from me with a link to an evaluation. Please take 2 minutes to complete that. Could we give our panelists a round of applause? If you want to unmic and say thank you, that would be awesome. Or if you want to drop something in the chat box. I want to thank you all so much. And Blessing, did you have any last words that you also wanted to add?
No, I was just clapping.
Yeah.
Well, we do. Oh, I did want to add, Nina dropped a number of links at the beginning of the chat. So we're going to add that to the email that also includes the evaluation. So definitely check your email and bookmark it for later.
And panelists, thank you so much. We appreciate you so, so much and the work that you're doing. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.